My name is Graham Henshaw, and I'm a faculty member at the School of Business and the executive director of the Allen B. Miller Entrepreneurship Center. It probably won't be a surprise that I'm going to be speaking about entrepreneurship in this lecture. An important thing to know, though, at the outset is that at William & Mary, we view entrepreneurship through the wider lens of entrepreneurial thinking, a highly versatile set of skills and a mindset that is necessary to solve wicked problems. This toolkit, so to speak, can be used anywhere, in nonprofits, in large corporations, and of course, in startups. We believe that entrepreneurial thinking makes our students more valuable contributors in all sorts of settings. Through this lecture, we'll explore the pillars of entrepreneurial thinking through a lens I think you'll recognize, but it's not the usual startup lens you might be expecting. To kick things off, I want to begin with a short video clip. To set the scene, it was 3:27 in the afternoon of January 11th, 2009. An air traffic controller sitting in a room 20 miles outside of LaGuardia is guiding planes out of New York's airspace, including US Airways Flight 1549.
Every day.
New York, Johnny 2760 is 5,000, turning your right to 150.
Johnny 2760, climb maintain 10,000.
10,000, Johnny 2760.
Cactus 1549, turn left heading 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds to lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures. Got emergency returning.
Who is it?
It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engines. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529, which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land 1313?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Johnny 2760, turn left 070.
070, Johnny 2760.
Hi, Cactus 1549. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 1549, runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
I'm not sure we can make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? All right. Kelly 2760, contact New York 126.8.
26.8, Joey 2760.
Cactus 1549, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle Flight 4718, turn left heading 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, Houston. Cactus 1529, if you can You got runway 29 available at Newark. Will be 2 o'clock in 7 miles. You can fly 4718, climb maintain 12000.
Okay, 1000 and you can 5 at 288.
And you can fly 4718, I'm sorry, I missed that. Say again?
And we're up to 12,000, 280 ahead.
Okay, thank you. You can fly 4718, turn left 220.
220, 4718.
That gets me every time I hear it. Let's step back for a moment and consider the characters in this story. You've got the passengers, 150 of them with stories similar to that of Ian Wells, who at the time was a student returning back to school after being home on winter break. Here's a brief snippet of Ian's perspective. A tremendous thud reverberated through the cabin as if the plane had just hit something. The plane shook violently and quickly lost thrust in both engines. Rather than continuing to climb into the sky, the plane just sat there, dead. A sinking feeling came upon me. For the first time in all my years of flying, I felt the height of where we actually were. It seemed like I was dangling 5,000 feet above Manhattan with nowhere to go. The plane sat there seemingly motionless while people tried to wrap their heads around the situation. You could hear a clicking sound coming from both engines as the pilots did their best to get them started again. This felt like the first situation in my life where I had zero control on the outcome. The pilots, who I'd never met, were now in control of my life. My plane was falling without engine power towards one of the most densely populated cities in the entire world, and I was helpless. We also have the air traffic controller, who you can hear on the clip. Here's his perspective. While I've worked 10 or 12 emergencies over the course of my career, I've never worked in aircraft with zero thrust capabilities. I understood how grave this situation was. After I gave him his instructions, the captain very calmly stated, "We're unable." I quickly vectored an aircraft that was still in my airspace and then gave 1549 a second option, land on LaGuardia runway 31. Again, the captain said, "Unable." The pilot told me he could not land on any runway at LaGuardia, but asked if he could land in New Jersey and suggested Teterboro. I then instructed the captain to turn right and land on runway 1 at Teterboro. The captain replied, "We can't do it." I replied immediately, "Which runway would you like at Teterboro?" The captain replied, "We're going to be in the Hudson." I asked him to repeat himself, even though I heard him just fine. I simply could not wrap my mind around those words. People don't survive landings on the Hudson River. I thought it was his own death sentence. I believed at that moment I was going to be the last person to talk to anyone on that plane alive. And you've got the pilot, Captain Chesley Sullenberger, or Sully, as we've come to know him. It was a day like literally 10,000 other days, until it wasn't. I had been flying airplanes for about 42 years, and in all that time, I never knew when or even if I would be faced with some ultimate challenge. I never had been so challenged in an airplane that I doubted the outcome. At the outset, we had the great advantage of knowing what had caused this. I'd seen the birds about 2 or 3 seconds before we struck them, but not enough time to maneuver away. When we struck them and the engines were damaged, I knew in that moment that it was going to be a life-changing event, that this was going to be unlike any experience I had ever had. I knew it was going to be the hardest day of my life, the biggest problem I would ever have to solve. But I was confident I could solve it. I never thought I would die that day. I was just trying to make sure that no one else did. I knew I could find a way. Even though this was an unanticipated event for which we had never specifically trained, I was confident that I could quickly synthesize a lifetime of training and experience, adapt it in a new way to solve a problem I had never seen before, and get it right. And so that's what I did in 208 seconds. I just love this story. I love planes. I always have for as long as I can remember. I think it's probably the fact that my dad was actually a B-17 pilot in World War II, and I'm sure his love of planes influenced mine. And while he never landed on the Hudson River, there is a story that my aunt tells us of when he scared her to death by flying her underneath the George Washington Bridge that we hear on that clip. Times were different back then. I love that the 1549 story has a great ending. Everyone survives, in case you didn't know. But I also love that the 1549 story is a fantastic illustration of something we call entrepreneurial thinking, which is why I title the second part of our discussion, Miracle on the Hudson. I think there's more going on here than we initially may be aware of. In preparation for this talk, I listened to that clip and others that even share the dialogue happening inside the cockpit dozens of times. My favorite part is when Captain Sully says, "We're gonna be in the Hudson." And the air traffic controller responds, "Can you repeat that?" And you know he heard him perfectly well. It just didn't compute. That interaction actually speaks to one of the entrepreneurial thinking pillars we'll discuss next. I'm going to take a few minutes now and unpack the story of Cactus 1549 using the framework we use at the Miller Center to equip students to think and act like entrepreneurs. As I previously mentioned, people frequently think of startups as the only manifestation of entrepreneurial thinking. But I can assure you it's only the tip of the iceberg, as we'll now see. First, let me run down through the list of skills and the mindsets that we've included in our definition of entrepreneurial thinking. First, the skills. We have opportunity discovery, then failing wisely, improvisation, and finally collaboration. On the mindset, the other component of entrepreneurial thinking, we have a mindset characterized by an openness to risk, tolerance for ambiguity, grit, and self-direction. Let's first start with opportunity discovery. This is the ability to spot opportunities where others don't. Sometimes in these situations, people can see a problem, but most of the time, people don't see anything at all. In the case of our story, we see an incredible ability in Captain Sully to identify the best opportunity for a safe landing in the Hudson River. The air traffic controller just can't see it. He asks Sully to repeat himself, even though he heard him perfectly well and was already thinking that all 155 passengers were goners. However, at 5,000 feet and in under a minute, Sully assesses the situation and spots an opportunity that most people would miss and others would simply disregard, even if they did see it. Which takes us to the next pillar I'd like to cover, which is openness to risk. We define openness to risk as turning towards an opportunity rather than away, even when there is a risk of failure. All of the options that Captain Sully had were risky. He leveraged his thousands of hours of piloting experience to choose one and move forward. Towards the end of the clip, Captain Sully calls for the flaps to be deployed, which on an airplane is exactly what you do on a landing approach. It's a very tangible picture of turning towards an opportunity that he had just identified to land on the Hudson. A trait that goes hand in hand with openness to risk is tolerance for ambiguity. This is about resisting the urge to try to predict the future and instead letting the best plan emerge. What we know about highly dynamic situations is that the past often offers very little predictive certainty about the future. And more importantly, in those situations, we just don't have all the possible information to know the right answer or to follow a predetermined plan. Captain Sully had the life-saving ability to tolerate ambiguity about that situation and let the plan emerge to land on the Hudson as the information he did have became apparent. Then we have grit, probably my favorite. Grit is persistence in the face of challenges. It might seem obvious, but landing a plane in the Hudson is hard in lots of different ways. I didn't play the cockpit audio because it's just too stressful. There are alarms going off. There's automated messages telling the pilots that the ground is getting too close. There's the exchanges between Sully and the co-pilot as they methodically go through the engine restart checklist. And there's also the air traffic controller, who we heard. Yet in the midst of all that chaos, Sully proceeds on a course calmly that results in a perfect water ditching. While normally talk about grit in the context of long-term goals, I think we can all agree that those 208 seconds probably felt like an eternity to most people on board that plane. And speaking of the cockpit audio, this 4-minute clip provides an incredible picture of self-direction. This is a bias towards personal action over waiting for instructions. Even though pilots are flying the plane, when you're coming in for a landing or you're taking off, they're required to follow the explicit instructions of air traffic control. As Captain Sully was assessing the situation in real time, he had to move from that direction-taking posture to one that was a more independent position, that literally directed the plane towards a destination contrary to what air traffic control was saying. Not towards LaGuardia, not towards Teterboro or Newark, but straight down the Hudson River. The next facet of entrepreneurial thinking we see through this story is improvisation, putting something out into the world and adjusting course as necessary. Sully improvised during Flight 1549, big time. They were headed towards Charlotte and they ended up in the Hudson. But importantly, Sully also improvised in unexpected ways. Improvisation is often about creating a solution where the normal approaches have failed. Sully was courageous enough to find a solution where the normal approaches didn't work. He improvised in ways that went against the norm. Another fascinating example of improvisation from this story that actually pulls in another skill is collaboration. When the plane had flaps out at about 200 feet, Sully says to the co-pilot, "Got any other ideas?" I love it. I love it. At that point in the experience, Sully has the mindset to be open to others' ideas and perspectives and seemed willing to improvise if there was a good suggestion. There wasn't. The final pillar of entrepreneurial thinking that we can observe through Flight 1549 is failing wisely. This pillar bumps up against a myth about entrepreneurs, that they swing for the fences and take outsized risks. That's actually a false narrative that unfortunately plays pretty well in popular culture. The swashbuckling entrepreneur that doesn't care about the outcomes. They charge ahead no matter what. That couldn't be further from the truth for most successful entrepreneurs. Rather, they risk what they can afford to lose. And often those experiments have learning as the primary driver. In our story, Captain Sully selected an option that was actually the least risky option of all of those in front of him. Captain Sully was willing to lose the plane in order to save his passengers and expertly guided the plane into the Hudson River for a water landing where all 155 passengers on board survived. Captain Sully was willing to lose the airplane in order to save his passengers and expertly guided the plane into the Hudson River for a water landing where all 155 passengers on board survived. So that's entrepreneurial thinking, not through the lens of a startup, but instead through one of the greatest aviation stories of all time. Which brings me to my landing approach for this lecture. Let's summarize where we've been in this story. You have an expert faced with a challenge he's never seen before. We have norms and expectations that just don't seem viable in this case. And we have an individual who synthesized his situation and his experience and found an opportunity that most would miss or reject. Wow. As this lecture concludes, I want you to think about a couple of questions. And just a heads up, they get progressively more difficult. First, which aspects of entrepreneurial thinking would you like to leverage more? What would that look like if you did? and what might be possible. So here's the big question. What is your Hudson? What's the opportunity that no one else sees? What's the idea that when you first share it with somebody else, they're going to reply to you, wait, can you repeat that? What's the opportunity that requires an openness to risk, will require grit, and most definitely improvisation? I look forward to hearing your Hudson River stories in the future. Good luck.